For millennia, the Carthuan had ruled the galaxy unchallenged. Their dominion stretched across countless star systems, they were enforced with an iron grip. Other species were allowed to exist, to serve, to submit. But never to challenge. Buried deep within the archives of their most ancient records was a prophecy, one dismissed by most as nothing more than a myth. It spoke of a species yet to rise, a species that would one day shatter the unbreakable chains of Carthuan supremacy. And so, for eons, their scholars searched the stars, scanning fledgling civilizations for any sign of the prophecy's fulfillment. Then, they found it. A blue world, teeming with untapped potential. Earth. At first, they paid little attention to humanity. Primitive, warlike, self-destructive, humans had not yet even breached the limits of their own solar system. To the Carthuan, they were insects, incapable of threatening an empire as old as time itself. But then, something changed. ###### The Gathering Storm. The council chamber aboard the Carthuan dreadnought Vorzath was eerily silent. A vast, obsidian table stretched before Supreme Commander Vraxel, its surface reflecting the dim glow of the galaxy map hovering above it. Around him, the highest-ranking minds of the Empire gathered, admirals, strategists, scholars. Each one had seen the same data. Each one had drawn the same conclusion. Humanity was advancing too quickly. 17 standard cycles ago, these creatures still relied on combustion-based propulsion, one of the strategists said, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Now, they are experimenting with quantum tunneling. Their progress defies all logic. They are nothing, scoffed Admiral Zorith. A primitive race playing with stolen technology. That is where you are wrong, High Archivist Sailvon interrupted, her voice sharp with unease. This is not mere luck or theft. The humans adapt. Their understanding grows at an exponential rate. They do not simply mimic, they innovate. Given time, they will surpass us. Vraxel's expression darkened. He had ruled through strength, through the certainty that his species was the ultimate force in the galaxy. But now, an unease gnawed at him. Then we act before they realize their potential, Vraxel declared. Before they can challenge us. The decision was made. Earth would be purged. ####### The hidden war begins. On Earth, humanity remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beyond their skies. The warnings had been there, strange anomalies detected on deep space scanners, faint distortions at the edges of known space. But they were dismissed as sensor errors, background radiation, or cosmic coincidence. Only a handful of people saw the truth. Colonel Adrian Locke stood before the large display in the underground command center beneath NORAD. The classified report spread across the table in front of him told a story that most refused to believe. Missing probes, unusual gravitational disturbances, signals intercepted from sources that should not exist. They're out there, said Dr. Elena Vasquez, a leading astrophysicist who had been tracking the anomalies for months. Something massive is moving towards us. And whatever it is, it's not friendly. Locke exhaled, his fingers drumming against the metal table. And you're sure it's not some new black-budget project? No chance, she replied. This is something else. Something far beyond anything we have. A cold weight settled in Locke's gut. If what she said was true, Earth was on the verge of an encounter that could define its very survival. But they were unprepared. If war was coming, humanity had no fleets, no planetary defenses, no weapons capable of fighting against an advanced extraterrestrial force. They had ingenuity, they had adaptability, but would it be enough? Locke clenched his jaw. The universe was about to find out. The Carthuan had never failed in their mission to secure the supremacy of their species. For millions of years, they had crushed potential threats before they could rise. To them, war was not a contest, it was extermination. A fleet had already been dispatched. Not a full armada, but a precision strike force, 3 dreadnoughts, supported by a dozen stealth frigates, all equipped with weapons powerful enough to reduce Earth to ash before humanity even knew they were under attack. There would be no warnings. No negotiations. The humans would simply vanish, their world reduced to a lifeless rock. ###### The approach. Captain Zalvoran stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Zoretha, his 4 eyes scanning the glowing tactical displays. The 3 Carthuan warships were now in position, hovering at the edge of the Sol system, their cloaking fields keeping them hidden from human instruments. His mission was clear: neutralize Earth before its people reached the point of no return. Yet something unsettled him. For the past cycle, his fleet had been scanning Earth's defenses, searching for any resistance, any hint that humanity suspected what was coming. They had found nothing. No orbital defenses. No planetary shields. No fleet of warships waiting to repel an invasion. It should have been comforting, but instead, it disturbed him. The humans had been progressing at an unnatural rate. Could they truly be so blind? Or were they hiding something? Regardless, the command had been given. The attack would begin at dawn, Earth's time. ######Earth's growing suspicion. On the planet's surface, Dr. Elena Vasquez and Colonel Adrian Locke were running out of time. The deep space anomalies had grown more erratic, almost as if something huge was shifting just beyond detection. The latest readings suggested an incoming force, one too perfectly synchronized to be anything but intelligent. "We need to sound the alarm," Vasquez urged as she paced the underground command center. "The government needs to know. The world needs to know." Locke ran a hand over his face. "And tell them what? That an invisible alien fleet is about to wipe us out? That we have no defense, no way to fight back?" She slammed her fist on the table. "If we do nothing, we're already dead." Locke exhaled sharply. She was right. He had spent his entire career preparing for theoretical wars, training soldiers for conflicts that might never happen. But now, a war was coming, and humanity was about to be caught completely off guard. He turned to his communications officer. "Send out a ghost protocol alert. Military channels only. I don't care who I piss off, every high-ranking official in every major government needs to see this data. Now." A warning would go out, but would it be enough? #######. The first move. Far above the planet, hidden behind its moon, the Carthuan fleet prepared for the first strike. The stealth frigates moved into position, aiming their planet cracker warheads at key locations, government hubs, research facilities, military installations. The Carthuan did not intend to invade Earth. They intended to erase it. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, ****. But then, something unexpected happened. A signal burst through the silence of space, a signal originating from Earth's surface. It was a pulse, erratic and strange, but unmistakably artificial. Zalvoran's secondary officer turned in alarm. "Sir, we're detecting a directed transmission. High-energy bursts across multiple frequencies." "A distress call?" "No, the officer hesitated. "It's scanning us." For the first time in Carthuan history, their stealth technology was being challenged. ###### Humanity's first strike. On Earth, Vasquez and her team stared at the screen as their experimental signal jammer locked onto something massive just beyond the moon. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They're here." Locke's expression hardened. "Then let's make sure they know we see them." The moment the scan completed, a pre-recorded transmission was launched into space, broadcasting in every major known frequency. "We know you're there." It wasn't a plea for peace. It was a declaration. The Carthuan fleet hesitated for only a moment, but that moment changed everything. The silent purge was no longer silent. Humanity had seen the enemy. And now, they would fight. The Carthuan fleet had planned for every eventuality, except this one. For eons, they had observed and eradicated lesser species without so much as a challenge. Now, for the first time in their history, an alien race had defied their stealth, detected their presence, and declared their knowledge of the threat. It was a statement. But was it a bluff? No, the Carthuan had learned not to underestimate their enemies, and this message was not a trick. The fleet had only seconds to decide. Captain Zalvoran's hand hovered over the control panel. It would be so easy to unleash the full force of the Carthuan weaponry, obliterate the humans before they could even think of defending themselves. Yet, something tugged at the captain's instincts. The humans had found them, but how? And more troubling still, why were they willing to face certain death instead of cowering? Launch a probe. Test the response, Zalvoran ordered. Let us see if they are as clever as they claim. ##### human response. Back on Earth, Colonel Adrian Locke stood at the front of a war room, eyes glued to the display. The signal they had sent out had been a calculated risk. The Carthuan had responded, but it was unclear whether they understood humanity's resolve. Locke's mind raced, but his voice was calm. Have all our defenses been activated? Yes, sir, replied his tech officer. We've mobilized every satellite we can reach. Ground-based systems are in place. We have a small fleet of old space stations we're retrofitting with any available weaponry. It's not much, Locke said under his breath. But it's something. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached him. We need to understand what they're planning. That probe is just the first test. If they're watching us, they're trying to determine whether we're a threat. They'll make their move soon. Locke nodded. Then we'll give them a reason to hesitate. ##### the Carthuan's mistake. The probe, a small, sleek craft designed for reconnaissance, slipped silently into Earth's atmosphere. It was meant to scan and transmit data back to the Carthuan fleet, a simple task that should have gone unnoticed. But it didn't. As the probe descended, it entered the range of one of the newly activated human satellites. The satellite, built for a far less sophisticated purpose, had been reconfigured by Earth's best engineers in a matter of days. Using old-world technology and newly acquired data from captured Carthuan fragments, the humans had built an interception system that was, while crude, capable of some startling feats. The satellite locked onto the probe. Human systems sent out a signal to the fleet, an intercepted transmission. And then, in a flash of ingenuity, they unleashed the first strike. The satellite fired a directed energy pulse, the closest thing humanity had to a weapon capable of damaging an enemy of the Carthuan size. It struck the probe dead on, crippling it mid-flight and sending it plummeting into the ocean. The Carthuan fleet observed in stunned silence. Impossible, muttered Zalvoran. They damaged the probe. Should we retaliate immediately, Captain? Asked the tactical officer. Zalvoran's mandibles twitched. No. They've revealed something unusual. Their ability to improvise. The humans are not as primitive as we thought. They are dangerous. #### human victory, brief but crucial. Back on Earth, the news of the probe's destruction spread quickly. The victory was small, but it was a victory. Locke stared at the data feed, a mixture of disbelief and triumph in his eyes. They got one of theirs, he muttered. They've seen what we can do with what we have left. Vasquez moved to his side. We're not just surviving anymore. We're fighting back. The victory, however, came with its own set of complications. The Carthuan had learned that humanity had the capacity to fight back, but they had not yet learned how far that fight could go. It would only take a single mistake, a single misstep, for humanity's entire defense system to fall apart. And that's exactly what the Carthuan were planning. But the humans weren't ready to stop. They'd just begun. #### the Carthuan's response. The Carthuan knew it was time to escalate the conflict. The probe had been a test, and now, the humans had passed it. But instead of surrender, humanity had struck back, challenging the Carthuan with a weapon they had never expected, ingenuity. The humans have weapons we didn't anticipate, Zalvoran muttered. But we will adapt. Let them feel the true power of the Carthuan. With that, the order was given. A full-scale bombardment of Earth's atmosphere would begin in a matter of hours. No more waiting, no more tests. The Carthuan would eradicate the threat, swiftly and decisively. But as Zalvorin watched the human fleet's movements, something gnawed at him, a growing sense that this battle was far from over. The Carthuan were the masters of destruction, but the humans were the masters of survival. And survival had a strange way of transforming the tides of war. The Carthuan fleet was positioned just outside Earth's orbit, poised to unleash hell upon the planet. Their strategy was ruthless: bombard the surface with high-intensity energy beams, obliterate all surface-based defenses, and then move in to cleanse the remnants of humanity. No more tests. No more games. The Carthuan had underestimated the human spirit. For every strike they had made, humanity had adapted. The Carthuan had expected Earth to bow in fear, to beg for mercy. Instead, the humans were digging in, preparing for war on a scale the Carthuan had not thought possible. ###### The human response, a plan in motion. The victory against the probe had not only bolstered humanity's morale, it had bought them precious time. Time that they would use wisely. Under the surface of Earth, locked within high-security military facilities, Colonel Adrian Locke and Dr. Elena Vasquez were finalizing a plan. It was desperate, dangerous, and above all, incredibly risky. But it was humanity's only hope of survival. "We've learned something crucial," Vasquez said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "The Carthuan may be technologically superior, but they still rely on predictable strategies. They have patterns. We've been studying their past campaigns, their attacks on other civilizations. We can use that against them." Locke nodded. "I've seen the same data. But we can't just rely on their mistakes. We need something bigger. Something they won't expect. That's where this comes in." Vasquez gestured to the holographic map before them, displaying Earth's weakened military defenses. The Carthuan had already knocked out much of Earth's orbital infrastructure, but humanity had managed to keep some weapons hidden. "We have the data from the Carthuan probe we destroyed, and the energy pulse we sent back through their own communication systems. If we use this..." Locke interrupted her. "You're suggesting we hijack their comms systems? Send them false signals? Force them into making a move they won't be able to take back?" "Exactly. #######. The Carthuan's overconfidence. The Carthuan were preparing for the final stages of their assault. On the flagship Zoretha, Zalvorin stood before his bridge officers, awaiting the moment to unleash destruction. The humans had displayed resilience, but this was a tactical advantage the Carthuan could not ignore. "The bombardment will begin within the hour," Zalvorin said, his voice cold and precise. "Once we begin, Earth will be unrecognizable. They cannot hide from us anymore." His officers nodded in agreement, their movements sharp, unwavering. For all their advanced technology, they saw the humans as little more than vermin to be wiped out. "We'll send the signal to the fleet to begin the orbital bombardment," the officer at the communication station confirmed. "We'll crush them quickly. They'll have no chance to retaliate." But there was one thing the Carthuan had not anticipated: humanity's ability to fight in ways no enemy had ever seen. #######. The unexpected counterattack. As the Carthuan prepared to strike, they received an unexpected transmission. It was brief, encrypted, and seemingly from Earth, but the coordinates, the signature of the signal, were entirely wrong. Zalvorin furrowed his brow. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Identify yourself." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the signal crackled with a message that echoed across every frequency in the Carthuan fleet. "You've been had." The Carthuan scrambled to understand what had just happened. The signal was a decoy, a trap designed to confuse their targeting systems. And it worked. The entire fleet's internal communications were scrambled, their satellite-guided weapons now misdirected. "Shut it down!" Zalvorin barked. But it was too late. The Carthuan fleet was already moving to counter the false signals, splitting up in disarray as their calculations became unreliable. On Earth, Locke and Vasquez's plan had worked. The Carthuans' confidence had led them to overlook one crucial thing: the humans had learned how to use their own technology against them. The Carthuan had been lulled into a false sense of security. Now, their perfect strike had become a mess of miscommunications. ####### the first true human victory. Back on Earth, Locke watched as the Carthuan fleet's movements faltered. It was a small victory, but it was monumental. "We did it," Vasquez breathed, staring at the chaotic response from the enemy ships. Locke allowed himself a brief smile. "Not yet, but we're getting there." The battle was far from over. But for the first time since the Carthuan arrived, the balance of power had shifted. The Carthuan had learned to fear humanity's adaptability, and that fear would only grow. ###### The Carthuan's doubts. Back aboard the Zoretha, Zalvorin stood in quiet contemplation. His fleet was still intact, but his confidence had been shaken. The humans had been unpredictable. And while the Carthuan had systems in place to deal with most threats, they had not accounted for the chaos that could be caused by something as simple as a deceptive signal. Zalvorin knew one thing for certain: the humans were no longer an afterthought. They were a threat. And the Carthuan would have to treat them as such. The Carthuan fleet had regrouped in the shadow of Earth's moon, their systems recalibrated but their confidence fractured. They had underestimated humanity, and now, they would pay the price for their arrogance. Zalvorin stood in silence, his multiple eyes staring at the glowing tactical map in front of him. The human resistance had forced his hand. The initial strike had failed, but there was no turning back now. "The bombardment will proceed," he said, his voice hard. "We will cleanse this planet of the human infestation." Yet even as he spoke the words, doubt gnawed at him. The humans had done something that few other species ever had: they had disrupted the Carthuans' flawless execution. The attack had been delayed, but that was merely the beginning. The battle for Earth was about to enter a new phase, one where the Carthuan would no longer have complete control. ###### Humanity's last stand. On Earth's surface, the situation was dire. The Carthuan were preparing for the final stage of their attack, an overwhelming orbital bombardment that would obliterate anything standing. But humanity had one last weapon in its arsenal: determination. Colonel Locke and Dr. Vasquez stood at the forefront of the United Defense Council's command center, surrounded by a cacophony of voices and blinking consoles. The earlier victory had bought them time, but now, the real fight was about to begin. "We've prepared every available ship, every weapon," Locke said, his tone resolute. "We'll make them regret ever setting foot in this system." Vasquez nodded, her eyes hardening. "We've developed a countermeasure, a way to knock their orbital weapons out of alignment. But we'll have to be quick. Once they start their bombardment, it will be almost impossible to stop." The key to humanity's plan lay in the old space stations, remnants of Earth's early ventures into the stars. Over the years, they had been forgotten, abandoned, and left to deteriorate. But with some quick work, these derelict stations had been outfitted with new weapon systems, making them surprisingly effective against the Carthuan fleet. "We've retrofitted these stations to act as a sort of tripwire," Vasquez explained. "They won't be able to get close to Earth without triggering a response." "Then we make sure they don't get close," Locke said, his voice full of resolve. "All ships, prepare for engagement. This is the last chance to show them what humanity is capable of." ###### The first assault. The Carthuan dreadnoughts began their slow advance toward Earth. The bombardment was about to begin. Suddenly, the calm of space was shattered. Earth's defense stations came alive with a deadly precision, launching a flurry of anti-ship missiles and energy pulses toward the Carthuan fleet. The Carthuan were not unprepared. They deployed their own countermeasures, energy shields that deflected most of the incoming attacks. But the humans weren't finished. On Earth's surface, a small flotilla of human ships, most of them old, outdated models, launched into the void. They were far from a match for the Carthuans' dreadnoughts, but their sheer desperation made them effective. "Prepare to engage at maximum range," Locke ordered as his ship, Resolute, locked onto a Carthuan vessel. Human ships flanked the enemy in a daring maneuver that the Carthuan had not anticipated. The humans were no longer the prey, they had become the hunters. ###### The Carthuan's frustration. Zalvorin watched as the battle unfolded. His fleet had been drawn into the chaos. The humans, though outmatched in terms of numbers, fought with an intensity that made the Carthuan's superior firepower seem almost insignificant. "They fight like animals, chaotic, unpredictable," one of his officers remarked, frustration clear in their voice. "This is not a battle," Zalvorin said slowly. "This is a survival instinct. We cannot simply crush them as we have done with other species. They adapt too quickly." The Carthuan had always relied on their technological superiority, but humanity's resolve had created a new kind of weapon, resourcefulness. Despite their losses, human forces were holding their ground. Every strike they made against the Carthuan felt like a calculated decision. They had the will to fight, and that made them a formidable adversary. ######### A shift in the tides. For the first time in the history of their civilization, the Carthuan had been forced to retreat. Their ships had suffered significant damage, far more than they had expected. "This battle is not over," Zalvorin growled. "We will push them back, and we will destroy this planet. They cannot win." But the damage had already been done. The Carthuan fleet, though still formidable, had lost much of its confidence. The humans had forced them into a position they had never been in before, fighting for survival. On Earth, Locke and Vasquez stood together, watching the battle unfold from their command center. "We're not done yet," Locke said, his voice gritty. "But we've done something they weren't expecting. We've shown them that Earth isn't just a prize to be taken, it's a fortress that won't fall without a fight." ######## A new resolve. For the Carthuan, the battle was far from over, but the once certain victory had slipped from their grasp. The humans had shown them the true meaning of resilience. The Carthuan had feared humanity's potential, and now they were witnessing it firsthand. As the battle continued, one thing became clear: humanity was no longer just a species to be destroyed. They were a force to be reckoned with. And as long as they had the will to fight, the Carthuan would never truly conquer Earth. The tide of the battle had shifted. Earth's defenses, though battered and outnumbered, had managed to inflict significant damage to the Carthuan fleet. The Carthuan, who had once believed their victory was assured, now found themselves struggling to hold their ground. Their ships were scarred, their systems compromised, and their leadership beginning to show signs of uncertainty. Zalvorin paced back and forth on the Zoretha, his mind racing. The humans had forced him into a position of weakness. But there was no turning back now. If Earth was allowed to survive, their defiance would become a symbol of the entire galaxy's resistance. He could not afford to let that happen. "We will not fail," Zalvorin muttered to himself. "We will break them, once and for all." ############################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################### regrouped for one last push. Locke and Vasquez were already preparing their final countermeasures. The initial victory had been crucial, but they knew the Carthuan would not back down. Earth's defenses were still too fragile to withstand a sustained assault. "We need a decisive strike," Locke said, his voice grim. "We've fought them off so far, but this is our last chance. If we don't end this now, they'll annihilate us." Dr. Vasquez nodded, her face etched with resolve. "I've been working on something. A weapon we can use to disable their flagship. If we can take down Zoretha, their fleet will crumble. They'll have no command, no organization. The weapon was humanity's last hope. It wasn't just an ordinary missile or energy burst, it was a disruption pulse designed to interfere with the Carthuan's advanced command systems. The pulse would disable the Zoretha's internal networks, severing the Carthuan's ability to coordinate and fight effectively. But there was a catch. The weapon would require a direct strike on the flagship, and the only way to get close enough would be a suicide run. Human lives would be sacrificed. But there was no other option. Hashtag the last assault. The final battle began as the Carthuan launched their most devastating barrage yet. Their weapons tore into Earth's remaining defense stations, the force of their bombardment threatening to wipe out humanity's remaining fleet. But Locke and his crew weren't about to let Earth fall without a fight. Prepare the pulse weapon, Locke ordered. All ships, engage. This is it. Humanity's last fleet, a collection of battered, aging ships, sped toward the Carthuan flagship with a single, unified purpose, to strike at the heart of the Carthuans' power. The Zoretha loomed in the distance, a monstrous vessel that dwarfed any human ship in size and firepower. But despite the odds, the humans pressed on. "We'll never make it through their defenses," one of the ship captains said, her voice filled with doubt. "We don't have to," Locke replied. "We just need to get close enough. No matter what happens, we have to make sure that pulse weapon gets to the flagship." The human fleet surged forward, breaking through the Carthuans' outer lines. The Carthuan, taken off guard by the renewed aggression, attempted to retaliate, but the human ships fought with a desperation that left the Carthuan reeling. Hashtag the final sacrifice. The pulse weapon was primed, its energy building with each passing moment. Locke's ship, Resolute, was at the forefront of the assault. His crew knew the stakes, they knew that if they failed, Earth would be lost. "We're too close to the flagship's firing range," Vasquez said urgently. "The next few seconds are critical." Locke clenched his jaw. "I know. Everyone, brace for impact. We do this for Earth. We do this for all of humanity." The ship lurched as the Resolute barreled toward the Carthuan flagship, the Carthuans' weapons flaring to life. Explosions rocked the human vessel as the shields flickered under the immense pressure. The crew struggled to stay in their seats as their ship pushed through the Carthuans' firepower. And then, just as the Resolute was about to take a fatal blow, the pulse weapon was fired. A burst of energy, bright and fierce, surged forward, straight into the heart of the Zoretha. Hashtag a desperate hope. For a moment, there was nothing. The battlefield fell silent. Then, the Carthuan flagship Zoretha exploded in a burst of light, its massive form shattering into pieces. The pulse had worked. The Carthuans' command systems were severed, and their fleet fell into disarray. Without their flagship to lead them, their forces scattered, lost in the vastness of space. On Earth, the human resistance had triumphed. The Carthuan were no longer a threat. The war was over. Hashtag aftermath. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth was left standing, but it had come at a cost. Humanity had lost countless lives in their desperate struggle, but they had proven that their resolve was unbreakable. Locke stood on the ruins of the command center, staring out at the stars. "We've done it," he murmured, his voice filled with awe. "We've won." But as the remnants of the Carthuan fleet drifted into the void, Locke knew that this victory had sent a message, one that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity would no longer be overlooked. Humanity had proven its potential. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The war was over, but the cost was staggering. Earth had survived, but the scars of the battle would never fade. The once pristine cities lay in ruins, and the human race had lost many of its brightest, its bravest. The Carthuan, their greatest threat, had been shattered, their fleet broken and scattered across the galaxy. Yet, despite the tremendous loss, humanity stood tall. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the smoke-filled skies of Earth, a new chapter began for humanity. The war had forged a unity among the survivors, a shared understanding that the human spirit was unbreakable, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Hashtag a world rebuilt. The days following the battle were a blur of activity. The United Defense Council, once a fractured coalition of governments, had now become the foundation of a unified global government. Nations set aside their differences, working together to rebuild what had been lost. Colonel Locke, now recognized as one of humanity's greatest heroes, found himself standing on the steps of a newly erected memorial. His gaze was distant, a mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. He had led the charge, sacrificed everything, and yet, he couldn't help but wonder if the cost had been too high. Behind him, the city was slowly being rebuilt. The war had left its mark on every corner of the earth, but the human drive to survive, to rebuild, was unwavering. "Colonel, we've done it," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice soft but filled with pride as she approached him. "Humanity has triumphed." Locke nodded, but his expression was somber. "We've survived. But the war isn't the end. It's the beginning of something greater. We've shown the galaxy that humanity is capable of far more than anyone imagined. The Carthuan thought they could wipe us out, but instead, they've sparked a fire that will burn across the stars. ###### The galactic reach of humanity. With the Carthuan defeated, humanity's influence began to spread throughout the galaxy. The remnants of the Carthuan fleet were salvaged and reverse-engineered, providing humanity with new technologies and weapons that once seemed like a dream. Earth's ships were rebuilt, faster and more powerful than before. The human race now had the means to defend itself against future threats, and the desire to explore and conquer the stars. As humanity's spacefaring fleet expanded, they encountered other alien civilizations, some curious, others fearful, and a few hostile. But no matter the response, the message was clear: humanity was not to be underestimated. The same species that had fought back an invasion of galactic proportions was now charting a path among the stars. Colonel Locke, now a leading ambassador in the newly formed Human Alliance, stood before the First Intergalactic Council. Representatives from dozens of species, once skeptical of humanity's place in the galaxy, now sat in awe. "We are Earth," Locke said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We have been tested, and we have proven that we are capable of anything. We've faced down extinction, and now, we stand with you, not as your subordinates, but as equals. We are the future of the galaxy. #########. The rising power of Earth. The galaxy, once dominated by ancient alien empires, now had a new player. Humanity's rise was swift. Through alliances and diplomacy, Earth found itself at the center of a new galactic order. The Carthuan, once a force to be feared, were now a broken relic of the past. Their former territories were divided among new human-led coalitions, while their people, who had once looked down upon humanity, now had to reckon with their defeat. The fear that the Carthuan had once instilled in the galaxy was now replaced with respect. Humanity's potential, its ingenuity, and its determination were now recognized by all. And while the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: humanity had come into its own. ######### A new era. In the years that followed, Earth flourished. The people of Earth had endured so much, yet they were more united than ever. With the Carthuans' defeat, they were free to rebuild their world, and their future. Human colonies were established on distant planets, and the first human outposts on the moons of other star systems began to thrive. Dr. Vasquez, now a leading scientist in the human space program, looked out from her laboratory window, gazing at the stars. "We've only just begun," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "The universe is vast, and humanity is just getting started." Locke stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the stars as well. "We've fought for our place in the galaxy. We've earned it. And now, we'll build our legacy." The story of humanity was no longer one of survival, it was one of domination. The human race had proven its worth, and with the Carthuans' defeat, the galaxy would never be the same. Earth had become the beating heart of a new galactic age, and humanity's potential had no bounds. ############################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################### As Earth's leaders and explorers set their sights on new horizons, humanity took its place among the stars, not as the prey of the galaxy, but as one of its dominant forces. The Carthuan had feared humanity's potential, and now, that potential was on full display. The galaxy, once a vast and uncaring expanse, had been irrevocably altered by the rise of humanity. What had once been a fearsome enemy's greatest miscalculation had become the foundation of an empire. Earth was no longer just a world in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, it was a power that would echo throughout the universe for eons to come. A futuristic human fleet, led by advanced, powerful ships, engages in a decisive battle against an ancient alien armada. In the background, the massive, shattered remains of the Carthuan flagship Zoretha drift in space. The scene captures a mix of destruction and victory, with Earth's ships, heavily armored and battle-worn, emerging victorious. The vastness of space and distant stars serve as the backdrop, symbolizing humanity's rise to power. The image conveys a sense of awe, determination, and triumph in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds.